Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi shir.
Shalom and welcome to today's Daf Yomi, Niddah Daf Ayin. Let us start on Samach Tes Amud Beis, around 10 lines from the bottom at the beginning of the sugya. Tana Rabbanan. Shnei Mosar Dvarim Shalu Anshe Alexandria es Rabbi Shua ben Chananya. There were 12 things that the people from Alexandria and Egypt asked of Rabbi Shua ben Chananya. What were they? Gimel Divrei Chachma. 3 were in matters regarding Chachma, questions in Halacha. Gimel Divrei Haggadah. 3 were regarding Drush. Gimel Divrei Burus. 3 were irrelevant, emptiness, silly things. Gimel Divrei Derech Eretz. The final 3 were regarding advice of matters of Derech Eretz, how to conduct your life. Says the Gemara. What were the 3 Divrei Chachma? The first one was as follows. Hazav v'hazova v'haniddah v'yaledes v'matzora shemesu. Any of these 5 tmeim who were mace. Ad masai metamen b'masa. Until what point will they be metame b'masa? If a Torah should carry any of these 5 tmeim, or an object will carry them, until what point can they be metame b'masa? Now obviously we're not speaking about the regular ordinary tumas masa. Even a mace is metame tumas masa. However, what we're referring to here is a specialized tumas masa that is applied specifically to these type of tmeim. This tumas masa is called tumas even misama, when there's a heavy, immobile boulder that is not meant to be moved, and a zav or etc., all the other ones are sitting on one of these boulders, and someone is to carry them through the boulder, or there's an object lying underneath. Regarding tumas mace, that is not considered a masa, because this is not the usual, typical way of carrying something with a heavy, immobile boulder. However, a zav, etc., in their case, there's added chumrah, astringency, that they are metam b'masa even when they are placed on top of an even mesam. Now, you would tend to think this is only applicable mechayim. As long as they're alive, they have a status of a zav and a zava. However, la'achar misa, once they die, they're simply mason. They're ordinary mason and do not have the halacha of even mesam. However, midrabbanan, the Rabbanan made a gzera that perhaps any of these people, zav and a zav, etc., will perhaps faint and appear to have died, and the observer will say, well, they're already mace, and therefore they're not metame be'evan mesama. In reality, they're still alive. So therefore the Chazal made a takana, a gzera, that they're still metame be'evan mesama even after misa, until they get to the point that it is evident, that it is obvious to all that they have indeed passed away. So this was their question. Until what point they were aware of takanas Chazal, and they said, until what point is a zav and a zav, etc., metame with the special masa that is applicable to them? Amar lahem ad sheyamoik habasar, until the flesh decays, when it's obvious that they died and there is no room for gzera of a fainted person who is obviously looks totally different than the state of misa. The second question they asked him was, Bas Meshulachas Mahi Lekuhuna. We know that if a person gives a get and his wife remarries, then afterwards, even if the second husband gives a get or passes away, the first husband may not retake his wife, may not remarry his grusha, that is called Machse Grushasai. Now, if somebody does go ahead and is Machse Grushasai, what is the status, what is the halachic status of the child? Is the child Pas Lekuhuna or not? Bas Meshulachas Mahi Lekuhuna. What is the halacha of a daughter of such a marriage? Is she pasal l'kahuna or not? Mi amrinan kal v'chayma. Do we say that we can derive with a kal v'chayma from a similar case? Uma alman l'koyin gadol she'ein yisura shave b'koil. We have a kal v'chayma. We find that an almana who marries a koyin gadol, we know that a koyin gadol may not marry an almana, and this is a very specific isser directed dafka at a koyin gadol. A koyin headed may marry an almana, so it's not considered an isser hashave b'koil. It is not equally applicable to all the Yidden. Still, in all, we find that b'na pogum. If almana is to marry a kohen gadol, the product of this marriage, the b'na, is pogum. He's tainted. So we find, even though there is a restriction on the it was a limited isser, is only a limited isser to a kohen gadol, nevertheless it has very drastic ramifications. B'na pogum. Certainly then, zu in our case of a mishulachas, she is surah shaveh b'koil. It is an equal isur that is applicable to everybody, whether a kohen, whether a Levi, whether Yisrael. Certainly, einay din shabna pogam. For sure, the child will be a pogam, will be tainted, and will be pasul le kahuna to marry a kohen. That is one side of the coin. Dilma, perhaps they propose, the people from Alexandria, Dilma, ma la'almana l'kohen gadol. We can't learn this halacha with a kavachayma from almana kohen gadol. Why? Because we find a chumrah, we find a stringency by almana kohen gadol. What is that? Shehi atzum is chalelas. The almana herself, I mean the wife herself, becomes nschal. She becomes affected by the marriage. So certainly we can understand that the chilul, the psul, will carry over from the almana over to the child. However, in our case, where a person remarries his gerusha, in this case, the isha herself will not become a schalal, and therefore one may question whether there is a psul that is applied to the child at all. That was the question they proposed to him. They were evidently learned people, and they presented their question pretty longish, based on very solid arguments. So this was the question they asked him: is a bas mishulachas pasal l'kuhuna or not? So he responded to them, Omer lehen, hi toyeva ve'en baneo to'even. In the pasuk of Masuk Rishasai, the Torah says, ki toyeva hi. She is a toyeva, she is a domination. We make a diuk, he, that dafka, specifically the isha is a toyeva, but not the children. There is no psul that carries to the children, and the child is certainly still kasher l'kahuna. So that was the second dvar chachma that they got a response from Yeshua and Hananiah for. The third shaila they asked him was a little bit more complicated. This is the story. Shnei mitzayroin shnis arvu karbonasein zebazeh. We know that a mitzayra, when he's completing his tahara and he needs to bring karbonas, so he needs to bring a set of karbonas, an oila, a chatas, and an asham. Now, if we have two mitzayroim that both brought their karbonas, each one had a full set of an oila, chatas, and an asham, and somehow their karbonas got mixed up. Nisarvu karbonasein zebazeh. We don't know which carbon belongs to which mitzvah. Now, ordinarily speaking, this wouldn't pose much of a problem. Rashi explains, the kohen would simply take the karbonas and remark over them l'shem mishahu, with the kavana that each carbon should be applied and should be oila l'ratzon for the proper owner. However, there are two additional factors that occurred in this story, which makes the scenario a little bit more complex. Again, shnei mitzayron shnis arvu karbonasein zebazeh v'karev karbonai shel echad mehem. One of the sets of the karbonos were karev, were already brought on the mizbeach, and then umeis echad mehem. One of the mitzayron passed away; he was meis. Hasheni ma tehei alav. What does the surviving mitzayra do? How does he bring his karbonos? Now let's examine the shaila. We have three karbonos: a oila, a chatas, and a asham. And we were already karev, we were makrev one set of karbonos. Now, the surviving mitzvah, regarding the oila, there's no problem. Meaning, even if the karbonos that were already karev were actually his karbonos, see, the problem is we're not sure whose karbonos were karev. Perhaps it belonged to the mitzvah that died. Perhaps the karbonos that were karev were actually his mitzvah, the surviving mitzvah's karbonos. So now, regarding an oila, it's not really a problem. Why? Because even say that the oila that was already karev was actually his carbon, he may still bring another oila. He can bring an oila and say, look, if I'm mechuyev the oila, if I haven't yet brought an oila, this is my oila. If the oila that was already karev was actually my carbon, so I was already yaitza the carbon oila, so this oila is an adava, it's simply a donation. So there's no issue with the carbon oila. However, regarding the chatas and the asham, it gets a little bit more complex. Why? Because we have a halacha that a chatas shemesu ba'aleha lemisa azla. You may not be makriv a chatas whose owner has passed away. So in this case here, we don't know who was the owner of this chatas. There's a chatas standing in front of us. We don't know who the owner is. Perhaps this chatas belongs to the mace, belongs to the mitzvah who already passed away. So you can't just be makriv it. You can't say, well, let's assume that it belongs to the surviving mitzvah and it's his chatas. No, there's a strong possibility that this chatas belongs to the mace, and the chatas that was already karev was actually belonging to the surviving Mitzera. He already had his Chatas Karev, and this Chatas is standing in front of us belongs to the mace. So you can't be makar of it. At the same time, the surviving Mitzera can't bring a Chatas. He can't assume that the Chatas that was Karev was his. Maybe not. He can't go ahead and bring another Chatas. Can't bring a Chatas Niddah. So he's stuck. What should he do? So that was the Shaila they asked him. What should the Mitzera do now? Amr Lahem, I have a simple solution. He goes and he writes a document, he gives away his properties to somebody else. And now, as a result of that, he is an ani, he's a poor man. What does an ani Mitzera do? Asher Mitzera, a wealthy Mitzera, brings a Chatas Behema. An ani Mitzera brings a Chatas Oif, it brings a bird. Now, a Chatas Oif may be brought ala Safik. This is a sugya elsewhere in Shas that explains what is the difference between the two types of chatois. The conclusion is that a chatas behema one may not bring when he's in doubt. He cannot just say, well, I'll bring it anyways just in case. However, a chatas ha'if, you may bring ala safik. So it's a very simple solution. He became an ani, and now a mitzera ani will bring a chatas ha'if. So he can bring a chatas ha'if ala safik on doubt, on the tzad, that he is still obligated to bring a chatas. He's yaitza with this chatas ha'if. On the tzad, on the possibility that he already had his chatas karev for him, and he's really not mechiv a chatas. So at the worst case, he brought a chatas ha'if, and it was just ala safik. So, simple solution for the chatas. But there's still one more carbon we have to address. What about the asham? Now Rashi explains that regarding an asham, there's actually a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Can one bring an asham when he's not sure that he's mechuyev asham? Rabbi Shimon holds, yeah, he can bring an asham and say, well, if I'm chayiv, I'm obligated to bring this korban, fine, it's my asham. If I'm not obligated to bring this korban, then instead of being an asham, it should be a shlamim. It should be considered as a shlamim, nedava, a donation to the mizbeach. Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, holds, one may not do that. You cannot bring a asham al tanai. You can't condition it. The Chachamim and the other shittas that disagree with Rabbi Shimon hold, no, one may not bring an asham al tanai. So now in this case here, when we address the Eilah, we address the Chatas. However, regarding the asham, we're still stuck. What's he going to do with this mitzvah? He can't just bring an asham and say, well, it's al tanai. On the tzad that I'm mechiv asham, fine. If not, it's a shlam. We can't do that. On the other hand, we don't know if he had an asham karev for him. Perhaps the asham that was karev, amongst the set of karbanas that was karev, perhaps it was indeed his asham and he was yaitze. Perhaps it wasn't. So he has a suffix and we're stuck. For the Gemara, v'ha'ika asham. What about the asham? We know that one of the karbanas mitzvah is an asham. What are we going to do with the asham? Amar Shmuel kasher karev ashamai. Evidently, we're speaking about a case where the asham was already karev, meaning one full set of karbanas was karev, the chatas, the eilah, and the asham, and in addition to that, the second asham as well was karev prior to the misa of the mitzvah. So in this case, the asham was already addressed. There's no question regarding the asham. The asham is out of the picture. Now, the eilah we said wasn't a problem to begin with because he can bring it and condition it. He can bring it if I'm mechiv, it's mine. If I'm not, it's an adava. And regarding the chatas, as we said before, he brings the chatas ha'oif haba ala safik. So now, evidently, the fact that Shmuel needs to needs to make an akimta that we're speaking about that the asham was already karev, had already been brought prior to the misa, and it is not an eitzah. You can't just go ahead and bring an asham al tanai. Evidently, Shmuel is following the opinion, the shita of the Rabbanan, who hold that you cannot just bring an asham al tanai. And therefore, he had to make an akimta that the asham was already karev prior to the misa. So now the Gemara has a problem with that. Now let's give a little introduction. We know that a mitzvah brings three karbanis. There's a difference between the karbanis of an asher and the karbanis of an ani. A mitzvah who's wealthy, who's an asher, will bring three karbanis, behema, animals, a chatas, an eilah, an asham, all behemoths. An ani, a poor mitzvah, however, he brings an eilah and an asham behemoths. Regarding the chatas, he brings merely a chatas. If he brings a bird. Now, let's picture the following scenario. The Metzora was an usher, and he's bringing his karbanos, and they start the process of the akrava, and he's makriv one of the behemoths. Then in the middle, somehow his economic situation drastically changes, and he turns to an ani. For instance, in the example that we had earlier, he gives away all his assets to somebody else, and he turns into an ani, split second. Now, what about the remaining karbanos? Is he obligated, is he mechuyev to maintain his higher status, to continue bringing karbanos as if he was an usher? Or may he change over and lower his standard and bring just a karban ani? So we find a machlekes, a three machlekes in the Mishnah. What is kaveh? At what point does his obligation become established? Is it when he brings the chatas? Meaning at whatever economic level he was holding at that point, that establishes his chiyuv all throughout the rest of the karbanos. Is it the chatas? Is it the asham? Or perhaps the tziparim, the two birds that the mitzvah will bring in the beginning of the process of the tahara prior to the karbanos. So machlekes tanoim. Let's go back to the Gemara. Rav Sheshes. Could it be that such a great man like Shmuel will say such a thing? Meaning, Shmuel said, yeah, you can't bring the asham al tanai, you can't condition it. Therefore, it must be speaking about that the asham was already karev prior to the misa. Now, regarding the chatas, Shmuel says, yeah, he's going to go ahead and give away his assets, turn to an ani, and bring a chatas ha'oif ala safik, as Rav Shua Hanani responded to the Anshe Alexandria. So we have everything covered. How could that be? How does this work out? How is this consistent with the shitas we find in the Mishnah? Again, come on, who is Shmuel following? Ikrab Yehuda. Who is he following regarding the other question, regarding the establishment of the standard of karbanos? At what point does his chiv become nikva? At what point do we establish, yes, you have to continue bringing this type of karbanos? At what point, at which carbon is the kaveya? Ik Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar Asham Kava. Are we following Rabbi Yehuda's Shita, which says that the Asham is kaveya? Meaning, evidently, Shmuel is following the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda regarding not allowing him to bring an Asham al Tanai. So then, is he following the Shitas of Rabbi Yehuda regarding this question as well? That the Asham is kaveya? Meaning, if he is an usher at the time that he brings the Asham, that determines the standard throughout all the other karbanos as well? If so, it won't work. V'kiven the kavala Asham b'ashiris. In our case, sure, the Asham was already brought prior to the Misa. So we have no issue with that. He doesn't have to bring an Asham al Tanai. He has his Asham. He was Yaitza, full-fledged Yaitza. Now, what about the Chata? So the Eitzah was, Rabbi Shua Chani advised him to give away his Nechasim, turn into an Ani, and now he can bring a Chatas as if he was a poor man. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, that won't work. Because the Asham was Kaveya. Being that at the time of the Hakravas Asham he was an Usher, he can't just switch over to an Ani and bring a Chatas Ani. Again, the kiv on the cover la asham bashirus leimotzi maisi chatas v'dalos. He cannot go ahead and bring a poor man's chatas. This is not influent in the Mishnah. Mitzayra shehevi karban ani v'heshir. If a mitzayra was an ani, he was a poor man, and he began bringing his karbanos in the middle, his fortunes changed and became an asher, or vice versa. Asher, he began as an asher v'heni, and he turned into a poor man. So which one do we follow? At what point does his chiyuv become established? Hakoil hoilech achar chatas. Whatever economic situation he was holding at during the time of the chatas, that is kaveya. Divi Reb Shimon. So Reb Shimon follows the chatas. Reb Yehuda hakol hoilech achar asham. Everything follows the asham. Wherever he was holding at the time of the akrovas asham, that is the kaveya. Rav Lezer and Yaakov Aimer hakol hoilech achar tzipirim. It is the time of the Hava Sipirim that is Kaveya. So now, is Shmuel following the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda? That cannot be. Because Rabbi Yehuda says, the Shas Asham, the Asham is Kaveya. And in our case, being that he was an usher at the time of the Hava Asham, he can't turn to an Ani and bring a Chatas of an Ani. So that's out. So now let's explore a different option. V'ik Reb Shimon. So suppose he's following the Shita of Reb Shimon, the Amma who says Chatas Kava. The Chatas is Kaveya. Fine. So therefore, we don't reckon with the Sha'as Havas HaAsham, but rather we focus on the time of the Havas HaChatas. So certainly a person can turn into an Ani and bring a Chatas Oif, because at the time of the Chatas, he was an Ani. But that won't work either. Because according to Reb Shimon, we mentioned, a person can bring an Asham al Tanai to begin with. Why then does Shmuel have to go make an Akimta, that the Asham was already brought Kaidam Misa, to avoid the problem of having to bring an Asham al Tanai? Well, if we're following the Shittas of Reb Shimon, and we have to say that the Eitzah, the advice, will only work according to Reb Shimon, who says, Chatas Keveya, so why not go all the way to Reb Shimon? Reb Shimon holds that regarding an Asham, a person may bring an Asham B'Safik and make it Tanai. If I'm Mechuyev the Asham, this is my Asham. Otherwise, it's a Shlamim. So how does it work? How does Shmuel's Akimta work? If it's Rabbi Yehuda, it won't work. If it's Reb Shimon, then why is it necessary to have brought the Asham prior to Misa? Let's see again. V'ik Reb Shimon, if we're following along the sheets of Reb Shimon, the Amma Chatas Kava, what's Kaveh the Chatas? So in that case, Afagav L'Loi Karev Asham, even if it's not speaking about that the Asham was already Karev, we're still okay. The surviving Mitzvah has a very simple solution. What's he going to do? Neisi Yacher, let him bring another Asham and make it Tanai, make a condition. He can stipulate. Why is that? The Hashamin and the Reb Shimon, the Amr Leisi listening. We have heard that Reb Shimon's opinion is that a person may indeed do that. He can bring a Asham B'Safik and make it Tanai. The Sanya, Reb Shimon, Lemachras. This is speaking about a Mitzvah who is a Safik Mitzvah. He's not sure whether he's mechuyev to bring the Karbanas Mitzvah. So what does he do? Maybe Ashamai Velugai. He will bring the day after his Tvilah, he will bring his Asham, his Lug of Shemen. It's a certain measurement of Shemen that he needs to bring. Velugai, Uma Amida B'Shar Niknar. They put him by the Shar HaMizrach by Shar Niknar. And over there, they go and the Makar his Karbanas and they put the Shemen, they put the dam on his thumbs, the whole procedure that a Mitzvah needs to undergo. Now, we're speaking about a Safik Mitzvah. So how can he bring an Asham? Says Reb Shimon, very simple. Umasna olav. He makes it tonight, he stipulates, if I'm in a Mitzvah, this is my Asham, this is my Lug, all fine and dandy. Vim lav. But if I'm not a Mitzvah, Asham zeh yeshal min adava. Let it not be an Asham. Let it be considered as a Shalmi Nadava, as merely a Shlomim that I'm donating to the Beis HaMikdash. Now, being that we don't know what the conclusion is, we don't know if this is Asham or Shlomim, so we have to apply all the halachas that are applicable to a Shlomim and as well as to an Asham. And therefore, V'oisei Asham, Ton Shchita Asai B'Tzafain, you need to shecht it on the Tzafan side of the Azara like a Asham. And you need to apply the matanas on the thumb of the Mitzvah like it would be his Asham. And you need to do smicha, you need to lean on the carbon, which that is a halacha specifically for Shlomim only, and not Asham. Shlomim and other carbonates, but not Asham. Nesachem, he needs to bring Nesachem like a Shlomim. Tnufa, he needs to do Tnufa like a Shlomim. V'chazei v'shoik, that as well is halacha by Shlamim, that the parts of the Karbanas, the Chaz v'Shay, go to the Kohanim. These are two halachas that are Asham halachas, that it's only eaten to Zichrei Kahuna, like Kache Kachim. Kache Kachim are only eaten to Zecharim Kohanim, and not to Nekevos. So this is a Chumrah that Asham has over Shlamim. Shlamim is a Kachim Kal, which can be eaten also to Nashim, Neshei Kahuna. One more halacha is Liyam V'Layla. Regarding the time limit of being able to eat the karban, we limit it only to a Yom V'Layla, which is the Zman Achila of a karban Asham, which is a day shorter than the 2 days and a night, the Shnei Yom V'Layla Echad, which a Shlomim has. So this is the conclusion of Reb Shimon's Chiddush, that a person, a fellow who has a suffix of whether he's a Mitzvah, and he's not sure whether he is obligated to bring an Asham, simple, he brings a karban and makes a T'nai. If it's an Asham, fine. If not, let it be a Shlamim. The Chachamim did not agree to the Shita of the Reb Shimon. Why? Why is that? Why can't he do the simple solution? Because we know that the Zman Achila, the time limit for eating a Shlamim, is Shnei Yamim Layla Echad. It is much longer, it's a day longer than the Zman Achila of an Asham. Now, what happens to this karban after a day and a half, after a Yom V'Layla? he's going to have to burn it. He can't eat it because we're concerned perhaps it's an asham and now it's nicer. So in effect, there is a possibility that he's actually taking a kosher shlamim and he's burning it for no reason. Perhaps it's a shlamim and it's still edible. So by doing so, by making a tanai with this carbon, he is generating a possibility that he'll be taking a kachim lebeis hapsul unnecessarily. That is the reason for the plukta of the Rabbanan on Rav Shimon's tanai. So in conclusion, we have a machlekes of Shimon Rabbanan whether you can bring an asham with a tanai. So now back to our kasha. We had a case of two mitzayroim whose karbanas got mixed up with each other. They were already makar of one set of karbanas, an oila, a chatas, and an asham. One of the mitzayroim died. Now the surviving mitzayra is stuck. The oila, not an issue. You can bring another oila and say, well, whether I'm mechuyev or not, here's an oila, let it be a donation. That's fine. Now, regarding the chatas, we had a problem because you cannot just bring the chatas that's here because maybe it belongs to the mace, belongs to the mitzer who died, and it's a chatas shemeisu ba'aleh. At the same time, we can't absolve the surviving mitzera. Perhaps he hasn't brought his chatas yet. We don't know. Maybe yeah, maybe not. Maybe the chatas that was hukrav was actually his. Maybe not. And you can't just bring a chatas al safek. You can't say, well, either way, it's a chatas, it's a donation. You can't do that. Regarding the asham as well, we had a similar problem. Asham shemeisu ba'aleha is lamisa. You can't be mark of the existing asham because maybe it belongs to the mace, and it's an asham shemeisu ba'aleha. At the same time, he can't just bring an asham and say, well, on the tzad, on the possibility that I'm mechuyev an asham, it's an asham. Otherwise, let it be a Niddah. You can't do that. We're stuck. So Shmuel came up with a solution. Shmuel said, look, regarding the asham, we're speaking about evidently that the asham was already carved beforehand, so that was out of the picture. The asham was never part of the equation here. Why? Why is that? Evidently Shmuel holds that you cannot bring an asham al tonight. You can't bring an asham and condition it. He was following the shita of the Rabbanan, who disagree to Reb Shimon's chiddush of bringing an asham al tonight. They hold you can't do that. That's why Shmuel had to make a kimta, had to establish that the case that Rabbi Shimon Hanani was referring to was evidently a case where the asham was already carved before and was out of the picture. However, regarding the chatas, what's he going to do for his chi of chatas? Said Shmuel, let him right away his nechasim, let him grant his properties to another person, let him turn into an ani, and bring a chatas oif ala safik. Although, at the time of the hakravas ha'asham, he was an usher. It doesn't concern us, because we don't follow the time of the hakravas ha'asham. In order to determine the mitzera's chiv, whether he's mechiv to bring the karbanos of an usher or the karbanos of an ani, how do we determine that? That doesn't follow the time of the havas ha'asham, but rather the havas hachatos. Evidently Shmuel is following the shita of Reb Shimon, that the chatos is kaveya. So we have a contradiction. On the one hand, he's following the Shittas Rabbanan who are chelik on Reb Shimon. He's not following Shittas Reb Shimon regarding the question of bringing an asham al tanai. And on the other hand, he's saying, well, the chatas is kaveya, which is exactly Shittas Reb Shimon. How does that work? Answers the Gemara very simple. Shmuel savalak Reb Shimon b'chada, upalag alei b'chada. Regarding one halacha, regarding the halacha of what is kaveya, which carbon is kaveya, which are the three things that kaveya, he will hold like Reb Shimon, that the chatas is kaveya. But regarding the chiddush of Reb Shimon, that a person may bring an asham al tanai, he disagrees upala galei b'chada. He disagrees with Reb Shimon on that halacha. So very simple. In conclusion, we basically have two discussions here regarding the karbanos of this mitzvah. One discussion is, can a person bring an asham min hasafik and make it tanai? Reb Shimon says yes. The Chacham say no. Then the other shayla was, at what point is it nikva? At what point are the karbanos of the mitzvah established to determine whether he is mechuyev to bring a karbanos of an asher or karbanos of an ani? There's a three-year machlekes. Rabbi Yehuda says the asham is kaveya. Rabbi Shimon says the chatas is kaveya. And Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yaakov holds it's not the chatas nor the asham, but rather the tziparim at the time of bringing the tziparim. Rashi explains that this is based on a sugya elsewhere that the Tanoim disagree regarding how to touch the pasuk, how to translate, how to interpret the pasuk. Asher lo yitzasik yodeh b'taharasai. It's referring to an ani who can't afford to bring a carbon asher, and the Torah uses the word that he cannot afford b'taharasai. So Rav Shimon says taharasai means davar hamachaprei, the carbon that brings him kapara, which is a chatas, and that is the carbon that determines his ability to afford a carbon. Rabbi Yehuda holds b'taharasai is davar hamachshiroi, is the carbon that enables him, meaning the carbon that we actually apply to the mitzvah. We take the dam of the asham and we put it on his thumbs, etc. So that is what the pasuk is referring to when it says b'taharasai. And Reb Lezer Yaakov holds that b'taharasai means davar hagorim le'tahara, means the initial state, the initial step of tahara, which is the tziparim, which enable him to bring the subsequent karbanos of mitzvah. So that is the determinant regarding the level of his chiyuv of karbanos. Continues the Gemara. Shloisha divrei agada. We just had 3 divrei chachma. Now let's move on to the 3 divrei agada that the people from Alexandria asked Rabbi Shua ben Chananya. We find a stira, we find a contradiction. One pasuk says that Hashem says, I don't desire, I'm not chafetz when a mace dies, when even a rasha, when he dies. I prefer that he repent and improve his ways rather than just disappearing. We find another pasuk that says, Ki chafetz Hashem la'misam, Hashem does want them to die. So it's a stira. Rishon ben Chanani responded, Kan ba'osin tshuva, kan she'ein osin tshuva. Very simple. One pasuk is referring to a person who did not avira, and he's not interested in doing tshuva. He's not involving himself in tshuva. Therefore, chafetz Hashem lahamisam. However, if a person does involve himself in tshuva, in the tshuva process, in that case, surely Hashem wants him to come back, wants him to fix his ways, and of course does not want him to die. The next divrei agada that they asked him was, one pasuk says, Ki lo yisa panim. Hashem will not be noisi panim. He will not show favoritism. V'lo yikach sheichat. He will not accept bribes. There's no way to do that to Hashem. Yisa Hashem panav elecha. Hashem does show favor. Yisa Hashem panav elecha. We say this during, this is one of the psukim of Birchas Kayanim. So how do these 2 psukim jive with each other? So he responded, Kan koidem gzardin, kan la'achar gzardin. The pasuk that says that Hashem will not favor, will not accept bribes, that is speaking about la'achar gzardin. After the oynish, the gzeira, the decree was already issued, there's no way to change that. Kan koidem gzardin. However, before gzardin, there is a concept of nesiyas panim. Hashem would favor somebody if he's deserving of it. Now Taisus points out that based on the Gemara Brachas, which the Gemara Brachas is a very interesting story, that the Malachi Asher is told to the Eibush, they complain to Hashem, how could you say in the Torah, Yis Hashem panav elecha, how could you promise the Yidden that you will find favor, they will find favor in your eyes, you will be nice panim to them, you will show them favoritism? Doesn't it say in the pasuk, Ki lo yisa panim, leikach sheichat? Exactly the same, it seems to be the same type of kasha that the people asked Rabbi Shua ben Chananya. So Hashem responded to them as follows. Hashem says like this, I wrote in the Torah, Ve'ochalta v'savarta v'rachta. You'll eat, you'll be satisfied, and then you will bench. You'll say Birchas HaMazon. Meaning that the chiyuv to make Birchas HaMazon is only if a person actually eats enough to get himself satiated. V'savarta. So min hadin, there's only a chiyuv Birchas HaMazon in that case. But the Yidden go ahead and they're due l'fnei Rishuras Hadin. Even when it's only a kezayis or a kibbutz, a small amount, he's not yet full, he still goes ahead and he benches and he says Birchas HaMazon. So they're going the extra mile. They're doing l'fnei Rishuras Hadin. Heich lo ya'aseh panim Yisrael. How could I not favor them? How can I not come towards them when they conduct themselves according to l'fnei Rishuras Hadin and they come towards me? So Taisus points out that the concept of being noisei panim is strictly to Yidden, as it says in that Gemara. The concept of Hashem being noisei panim is only because Yisrael also do extra credit. So that only applies to Yisrael. That will not apply to Goyim. So according to that, Taisus just points out that when the Gemara here makes a distinction between koidem gzardin, on the Achar Gzar Din, that the concept of Nesias Panim will only apply Kodim Gzar Din and not La'achar Gzar Din. After Gzar Din, perhaps there are other ways to tear up the Gzar Din, but not through Nesias Panim, not through the concept of Hashem being Noisei Panim, finding favor in Hashem's eyes. So this halacha is strictly by Yisrael. By Yisrael, in a case of Kodim Gzar Din, the concept of Nesias Panim will apply. Continues the Gemara. The third thing they asked him was, Kosev echad oimer ki bacha Hashem b'tzion. Hashem will choose Yerushalayim Tzion. V'kosev echad oimer ki al apiv al chamasi oiser yazois. This city aroused my anger and my wrath. From the day it was built until today. How do these two psukim fit with each other? So he said, Samakasha. We know that Shlomo HaMelech married Bas Pari, and evidently that aroused the anger of Hashem. So Hashem is saying, before Shlomo went ahead and did that, certainly Kivacha Hashem b'Tzion. Tzion was a chosen city. But the pasuk that seems to be speaking negatively about Yerushalayim is discussing the era of La'achar Shenasa Shlomo es Bas Pari. So it's two different subjects. One is Kaidem Shenasa Shlomo Bas Pari, one is afterwards. So in conclusion, we have three Divrei Haggadah that they asked him. Firstly, what about Hashem's desire for a Rasha to die? One pasuk says Hashem does, one pasuk says Hashem doesn't. The answer is, it depends if he's doing tshuva or not. The next question they asked him was, does Hashem show favoritism? The answer is, Achar Gzar Din not, Kodim Gzar Din yet, and as Taisus explained, that's all because the Yidden behave accordingly, and they also go the extra mile to be Mekayim, to be Medaktik, to be stringent on themselves, to be Mekayim the mitzvah Hashem. So they deserve this corresponding anhaga from the Eivishter. The third question they asked was, is Yerushalayim the chosen city or not? The answer was, Kodim Shenasa Shlomo Bas Pari, it is considered Kivacha Hashem b'Tzion. However, afterwards, the pasuk of Ki al apiv l'chamasi does apply. Let's continue the Gemara. Shloisha divir boirus. Three questions of nonsense. They asked him. Number one, Ishter shaloit mao shetetami. Loit's wife turned into a mound of salt. Is that still considered like a person? Is it metame tumas meis? And a person who comes in contact with that is tameh? Or do we say that now it underwent a very dramatic transformation, a chemical transformation? It's not human anymore, it's merely salt, and it cannot be matame. Mao, what is the halach? Mao shetetami. Amar lahem, so he responded to them accordingly, and he said, indeed, meis metame, ve'netziv melach metame. It's merely a block of salt, and certainly there's no tumas meis applied to melach. The next question they asked him, Ben Shunamis Mao Shiitami. There was an Isha called the Isha Shunamis who didn't have any children, and she got a child, Benes, and what happened was he died. And she went to Elisha, and she told him, the child that came about through your bracha has now passed away, and he was Mechayim Mesim. So now the question is he still considered, does he still have a din of a mace? What's his status? Is he matame? Is he considered a mace? Or is he considered a chay? Ben shunamis mao shiitami. Amar lahem mace matame vein chay matame. He is definitely considered to be a chay and has no mace halachas whatsoever. One more last halacha, the question they asked him, Mesim la'asad lavi after tchiyas ha-mesim, what's going to be? Tzrich and hazar shlishi v'shvi? Are they required to undergo hazar paraduma the third and the seventh day? Meaning, are they considered to be tzmei mesim? Whether it's because they died themselves, or as the Marshal explains, because perhaps they have come into contact with a mace when they were still alive and never underwent a proper cleansing process. Do they need it? Or yain tzrichim? Are they considered like a berich hadasha, a new person, being that it's a new guf, so it has no relation to the old guf, and even if there was a tumah in the old guf, it will not carry over to the present guf. Amar lahem, when tchiyas hamesim will actually occur, we'll delve into it and we'll figure it out. Ikad Amri, there's another version that he said, certainly at the time of tchiyas hamesim, we will be graced with Moshe Rabbeinu's presence, and how fitting, what better appropriate person to ask such a question than Moshe Rabbeinu. Certainly he will be able to respond to us and instruct us how to proceed. The last classification was Divrei Derech Eretz. There were 3 Divrei Derech Eretz that they asked him. Number 1, Ma Yaseh Adam V'Yachkam. What should a person do to become wise, to become smart? Amar Lehem Yarbe V'Yeshiva. He should involve himself, increase his learning, spend time in yeshiva. V'Yamayit B'Schera. And he should minimize the time that he involves himself in doing business. That's a sure way to become a chacham. Amru, so they responded to him, is that so? That's a magic formula. Harbi Asukein, many have tried this method, and they were not successful. Ella, so he responded and said, it must be Yivakshu Rachmim, must be that it's not enough to do the Yishtadus, to make the effort. You need to add another component, which is the component called Yivakshu Rachmim. A person may make Yishtadus all he wants, but he needs to daven, he needs to ask Hashem for Rachmanis. He needs to go to the source of Chachma and ask and beg Hashem to endow him with Chachma. Shenemar, Ki Hashem yiten Chachma. Who gives the Chachma? Only Hashem. Mipiv das esvuna. Das esvuna comes from his mouth. Taner Abchir, Mashal lemelech basar adam. It's a mashal to a king. She'asa suda la'avodav. He made a banquet for his servants. Umishager la'oyavav v'mashal la'fanov. And to his favorite servants, his friends, he'll go and he'll send from what's in front of him, meaning his personal portion he will go and send to the ones that are close to him. Similarly, regarding being zoicha to chachma, chachma is mipiv, Hashem yitan chachma, mipiv das esvuna. That is so connected with the Eivshter. As we all know the famous line, the Torah is so connected with Hashem. For a person to be zoicha, to acquire Torah, he needs to beg, he needs to ask Hashem, give me, please, give me from what's yours. Give me your personal possession, so to speak. If that's the case, if tefillah is so essential here, it is a required condition, precondition to be zoicha to chachma, so why then do we say yarba v'yeshiva v'yamayit b'schera? Why is that necessary? A person should simply daven to Hashem, and that will be enough to receive the chachma. My kamashmalan. What is he teaching us by adding those conditions as well? You can't have one without the other. A person needs to make ishtadlus, he needs to make an effort, he needs to immerse himself in Torah and try to avoid distractions as much as he could, to be mamayit v'schera, to minimize and not to get over involved in earning a living. At the same time, he also has to ask Hashem for Rahmanas. You need both together. It's a winning combination. The second question they asked him was very similar to the first one. What should a person do to become wealthy? He should do lots of business and be very faithful and honest in his dealings. Many tried this and were not matzliach, were not successful. Ella must be, he said, Yivakesh rachmim mimisha isha shaloi. He should go ahead and ask and daven to Hashem, because after all, where's the money coming from? The Aisha belongs to Hashem. Shenemar, Liya Kesev. Hashem is saying the money is mine. Liya Zov, the silver, the gold. And the only way to get it is by asking it from Hashem. A person needs to make the ishtalas, but he needs to add a lot of tefillah. So again, the same question. My kamashon, why is it necessary to be Yarber B'Schera, Yisa V'Tevei Amuna? Let tefillah be sufficient. It's not enough to have one without the other. A person has to combine his own efforts together with tefillah. The third and final question they asked him was, Mayase Adam v'yula banim scharim. What should a person do to be zoiche to banim scharim? Amar lehem, Yisa isha yigenas loy. He should marry a woman that's fit for him, that is appropriate, that is on his level. V'yikadish atzoi b'shas tashmish. He should be mekadosh himself, sanctify himself in the time of tashmish, and thereby he'll be zoiche to have banim scharim. Amru, harba asukein v'lo ha'ilu. They were not successful. Many have tried and were not matzliach. Ella must be, he concluded, that you need to add a component of tefillah. Yivakesh rachmim mimi shehabanim shaloi shenemar hine nachlas Hashem banim sacha priyabotan. The nachla is Hashem's nachla are the children, meaning Hashem is the one that endows, that gives a person his children. You need to daven to be Zaycha. You need to make ishtadlus, but you need to also daven a lot to be Zaycha, to banim, scharim, to good children. Ma'ika mashmalan, the habla you need both components. You need to make the ishtadlus, Yisa Isha Igenaslai, you need to Kaddish Atzmai, as well as Tefillah. One more line in the Gemara. My schar priya batan. What is the pasuk referring to when the pasuk says that children are schar, are in the merit, are schar of priya batan? What does that mean? The schar in the reward that a person is masha atzma, he refrains from being mazriya bebetan kadesha tazriya ish tchiloi. He arranges things in a way that he encourages the isha to be mazriya tchila. And in this way, he is exhibiting a tremendous amount of self-control and strength of character, so that to provide the other person with pleasure. In that merit, in that reward, Hashem will give him children, banim, proper children, good children, in the schar of his mitzvah that he is being mahana his wife. The Chalam Sefer brings down that earlier in the Masechta and the Aflam, the Gemara calls these people Giboyer Koyach. Here down on the Aflam Aleph, the Gemara refers to these people as Giboyer Koyach. And the Chassam Sefer explains that, yeah, it does require a tremendous strength of character to exhibit self-control in order to provide another person with his needs, and therefore the schar is tremendous. He's zeicha to good children. Amen. Ken Yiratzin. So in conclusion, these are the three things, three different derech eretz that they asked Rishub and Hanania. Number one, how are you zeicha to chachma? How are you zeicha to oisher? How are you zeicha to banim scharim? And the response was, it's a multi-pronged effort. You need to make the proper ishtadlus, and you need to daven a lot. Regarding chachma, you should be marba b'yeshiva mimayit basic and daven. Regarding oisher, you should be marba b'schera and be noise be'emuna and daven. Regarding banim scharim, you should be noise isha hagenasloi and be mekadesh atzmai b'shas tashmish. And the Gemara adds the point about being masha, to wait and allow the isha to be mazriya tchila, to get to her climax first, and as well as tefillah, which is a very necessary component to everything. The Maharsha points out that although the Gemara elsewhere seems to indicate that regarding bani chayi and muzayni, these things are totally a mazel and not given to manipulation. However, the Maharsha points out, it seems from this Gemara that for a person to make an extraneous effort, make the proper ishtadlus, show his commitment, and daven a lot, ask from the Eibush the Rachmanis, perhaps he can actually change his destiny. He could change his determined destiny, and be zeicha to something he wasn't even meant to get lichatchila originally at the time of his yitzira, and that requires a lot of effort and a lot of tefillah. Amen. Kein Yiratzon.